friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing what it's really like giving birth during COVID. But first, really quick, if you like my video, if you like my channel, please like and subscribe down below. Okay, so what is it like giving birth during COVID? I get this question all the time, especially from pregnant women who are due in the next couple of weeks. And I think right now is probably a great time to talk about it since we seem to be in a bit of a third wave. And today I'm just going to share what my personal experience was. Again, this is my experience. This may not be everyone's experience, but obviously I can only share what I experienced. So a little bit of background. The pandemic hit the first week of my second trimester. So I had a really rough first trimester, and right when I was like, amazing, things are going so much better, we got put into stay-at-home orders, which in Southern California was really, really bad. So because of when the pandemic hit, I ended up going to most of my key appointments alone. So that was my anatomy scan, my growth scan, most of my doctor's appointments. Because they were still figuring out what to do, it was like no visitors, no spouses, no one could go with you. So I went from basically having him at all of my first trimester appointments to having to go into all of my second trimester and third trimester appointments, not only alone, but masked and gloved and like sanitizing like crazy, and it just was a really, really big shift. So thankfully everything with baby was okay, because I honestly don't know how I would have even handled getting bad news by myself. And I know that's something that a lot of women have actually had to deal with the last year, was getting really bad news at one of these appointments all by themselves. And if that's the case for you, then I'm just so sorry that that's what you went through. I think for pregnant women especially, the pandemic has been a little bit extra traumatizing because of the changes that it really has caused in the way that we get to experience our pregnancies. But I also think that going through pregnancy and childbirth during all of this gives you an extra kind of strength. I think we've all had to be strong because, I mean, it's not like we have another choice. But I think it does. It gives you strength. But anyways, my due date was early September, and with my due date came the looming anxiety of having to go into the hospital. I mean, we literally, since March, had been taking all the precautions. We'd been doing everything we could avoid or do to avoid exposure. And here I was basically walking into a place where I knew there were COVID positive people for one of the most like vulnerable experiences that I think you can even have, which is to give birth. And just really, I think the unknown of what walking into the hospital would look like and giving birth during this time was just really stressful for me. It was just a lot of like, I remember unpacking and repacking my hospital bag over and over again, doing all the research, trying to figure out like what I needed, what would be most helpful, and it kind of just felt like I was preparing for battle. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it really was like I wanted to make sure I had everything I could possibly need, because I knew that right now they don't want you going in and out of the hospital. So it was like we had one chance to get all of the stuff we needed in, and otherwise it would be a really big hassle to have like my husband go out again and grab more stuff and have to get rechecked and just be like another potential risk for exposure. Definitely like it was a process. I think a huge part of my anxiety as well revolved around not knowing when I would go into labor. And I remember stressing for like weeks because I had something called prodromal labor. So prodromal labor is basically practice labor, but my contractions would go like to like 5 minutes apart for like 2 or 3 hours, and I would literally be packing and repacking my hospital bag and thinking, okay, this is it, we're gonna go in, we're gonna do this, and then they would just die off. So it was really confusing. It was literally 2 weeks of almost every night thinking, I'm gonna have a baby tonight, and then not having a baby. At one point we even had to go into the hospital because I was experiencing like decreased fetal movements, which was really scary. But naturally, by the time we were actually seen at the hospital, he had started moving again, and they monitored him and everything was fine. But it was terrifying not knowing. And I think that not knowing for me really revolved around not knowing when my water would break, not knowing when I would go into labor. I'm a planner. I really didn't love that aspect of it because it wasn't something that I could plan. But anyways, I was almost 40 weeks pregnant. My doctor and I both had thought that I was going to labor like a couple of times because I was showing all the signs. My body was definitely like working on it and working towards it, but it just kind of stalled out. And I want to say like 10 days between checks, and I just wasn't progressing. So like 2 days before I hit 40 weeks, my doctor gave me the option to be induced. And she said like I could be induced the next day, or I could be induced like 5 days later, and it was up to me, but that there was no middle ground. It was the next day or 5 days later because of her schedule and when she was like off and wasn't going to be there, because her husband was also on call, so she couldn't be on call when he was on call. So I basically had the option to have my baby the next day or wait like 5 or 6 more days of this like stressful back and forth. Am I going to labor? Am I not going to labor? And for one, I was already carrying huge. I was carrying a large baby from like, I want to say my 32-week scan on, it was already showing that my baby was like 85th to 95th percentile. So this child was large, and I definitely had the fear that I wouldn't be able to deliver the way I wanted to if he got much bigger, because I really, really wanted to avoid a C-section. So at like 39 weeks and 5 days, my doctor actually gave me the option to get induced, which is something I swore I would never do. Like, my whole pregnancy, I did not want to get induced. That was my one thing. I didn't want to get induced. I didn't want drugs. I wanted, like, a quote-unquote natural childbirth. Not that any childbirth is unnatural. That's just what they call it when you just don't use drugs for childbirth. And I knew that getting induced not only raised my chances of needing an epidural, but it also raised my chances of a C-section by like, I don't know if it's like 20% or 30% or 50%. It raises your chances of ending up needing a C-section when you get induced. So I knew that that was a very possible risk, but I also just had this like knowing that it was time to have my baby. And I don't even have an explanation for that, like whether that was just like God gave me the certainty that it was time for him to come out, because I literally went from I will never have an induction to okay, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do this tomorrow. And I think a huge part of it was that my body had literally been basically in labor for 2 weeks at that point. It had been going through cycles of contractions. It had just been like up and down. And I was so exhausted mentally and physically. And also like concerned that something was going to happen with my baby and I wasn't going to know because I wasn't being monitored. But I think the exhaustion more than anything was a really big factor, because I didn't want to have another week or 2 of this and then go into labor just so tired, which is what I was worried was going to happen. And I think a lot of it came down to weighing the risks. In my case, the risk of waiting to have my baby and not causing a C-section was basically just as large as the risk of getting induced with Pitocin and then having to have a C-section because of that. So we ended up just deciding that tomorrow was the day, and she got it scheduled for 5:30 a.m. the next morning, which was great because I'm really impatient when something's like, okay, we're gonna do this. Like, I wanted it as early as possible. But it meant that whole afternoon we basically were rushing around because I had to get COVID tested, because that's the requirement for inductions, and I had to make sure my hospital bag was ready. So I definitely repacked my hospital bag like twice the night before my induction, and I'm actually going to share another video later on what I recommend packing in your hospital bag right now, because it is a little bit different than I would say it is non-COVID. There's stuff that I packed, or that I wish I'd packed, that you wouldn't typically think of not during a pandemic. So I will share that later. I did not get very much sleep before going in to have my baby, that is for sure. I was super nervous about being induced, but I was also like kind of exhilarated, excited, because I knew that it meant we were in the final stretch. It meant that we were going to meet our baby one way or another, whether I had the baby naturally, whether I ended up with a C-section, like whatever the case, we were going to meet our baby. And that was so exciting and terrifying and just like all of the feelings at once. So morning of my induction, we wake up bright and early at like 4 a.m. So it wasn't even bright yet, it was just early. We got to the hospital at like 5:15, 5:20. We still had to go through emergency which I was nervous about, but emergency was basically empty at that time, and they got us literally right through emergency, right to labor and delivery, because they were already expecting us, which is kind of like the great thing about induction, is it's scheduled. I really liked knowing that there was a room for me, knowing that my doctor knew that that was the day and that she was going to be ready. So all of that just gave me a lot of peace of mind that I actually wasn't expecting to happen. As far as like the changes that I felt because of COVID during that, really it was just that everyone was in masks. And of course in emergency there's like a little like COVID only section, but because it was so early, it was literally just us in the emergency room, so it wasn't a big deal. So basically just the masks and the fact that I had to be masked up until we were alone in our room, and then if people would come in, I would put my mask on. If people left, I would take my mask off. And then once I was like in more active labor, they didn't enforce me wearing my mask, and that I guess is like per provider. They get to decide those things. So for me, I was really lucky that that was not enforced, but for some people, I guess it is enforced. And I had talked to my OB ahead of time asking whether or not I would have to wear my mask, and she said that that was not something that they currently enforced because they thought that giving birth was like hard enough. I do want to say too, the hospitals really do a really awesome job. They take a lot of precautions. They make you feel really safe. It doesn't feel like giving birth in a pandemic. Like, I didn't ever feel unsafe. I didn't feel like anyone was sick. And they do a really good job of keeping it like lighthearted and encouraging. So I would say like once we were safely in our room, obviously we couldn't leave our room. I couldn't like walk around. But once we were safely in our room, it really did feel safe. I could get a hold of my nurses, no problem. And I definitely used my call button because I had to keep getting my monitors adjusted because the way that my belly was, it was kind of like, I think they called it a basketball belly, which sounds really funny. But it was so round and hard that my monitors kept sliding when I had a contraction. And because I was induced with Pitocin, you actually have to be monitored the whole time. You can't like take them on or take them off and put them back on. And when it got to the point of delivery, it was literally just my OB, who I love and is the best person ever, and then the two nurses who had actually been taking care of me the whole time, because my whole labor was so fast that they didn't even have like a shift switch. So it was literally the people that brought me to my room were the same people that were there when I delivered my baby. I think one of the biggest COVID related changes was just not being able to have anyone else in the room with me except my spouse. Like I would have loved to have a doula. That was my original plan when I got pregnant, was to have a doula or to have like a photographer, or I mean even like my mom would have loved to be there, or his mom or his stepmom. Any of those people would have loved to be in the room. And I think that was the biggest shift, was not even having the option to have more people there. But overall, I think other than like maybe a doula, I think it honestly ended up being nice that it was just my husband and I in the room with the doctors with the doctor and nurses, because I think I probably would have been a little bit uncomfortable with more people there, just because like when you give birth, you're literally like half naked most of the time, and that's not really a time that you want to be self-conscious about who's in the room. And the last thing I wanted to think about was like who was there watching. So it was nice only having people that I was actually really, really comfortable with, and not having too many people and not being like overwhelmed by the amount of people in the room. Another change was the level of PPE that my doctor and nurses like scrambled to put on when it was like, okay, it's baby time. It was literally like almost comical watching everyone run around, and like literally it was a cartoon. Like they were just like throwing on equipment, moving stuff around. Like it was 0 to 100 so fast, because no one was expecting like a first time mom to come in and like 5.5 hours later be ready to push out a baby, because I definitely wasn't expecting that either. I remember thinking like, what? This is happening now? I thought I'd have like, I literally thought I'd be in labor for like 24 hours. So I was not expecting things to progress as quickly and as intensely as they did. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with the Pitocin. But it was like 0 to go time so fast. Within the masks and the extra like PPE that the doctor and nurses had to wear, I don't feel like there were a lot of changes in terms of how all of that went. I think for the most part it felt more normal than I was expecting to give birth in a pandemic. And also, I just want to say, like, my doctor, my OB, is genuinely amazing. She's like the best OB I've ever been to. And the nurses were also awesome. They were like so encouraging. It felt like I had my own like little cheerleading squad, which was like funny, but also like really, really helpful when you're going through something so intense. Super grateful that that was my experience, because I know a lot of people do not have that birth experience. I was dealing with an awesome team that you could tell really wanted to be there and was also like really excited that I was having a baby. So that was cool that even though I didn't have my family there, it kind of felt like I had family there no matter what. I'm going to skip over the rest of the birth, like how the actual birth went, because I'll probably talk about that later. And also there's just not enough time to talk about it right now. But the thing I want to just like remind you guys and encourage you guys, if this is something that is going to be like what you're going through the next couple of weeks, is that once they put that baby on you, honestly, you are not thinking about anything else. You're not thinking about the pandemic. You're not thinking about like having people in masks. You are just looking at that baby, and you're also so tired and like shaky from going through birth, and like the last thing you're thinking about is anything COVID related, which is awesome. After he was born, and I had to get like stitched up and all of that, and he had to get his lungs cleared out because he had fluid in his lungs, which is really normal for such a fast delivery. But after all of that was done and he was fine, they put him on me for skin to skin time, and they gave us about like an hour, 45 minutes just to be alone in that room and bond. And after that, then it was time to like move me to the recovery room. But yeah, overall, I don't think birth was like crazily affected by COVID, other than the fact that I couldn't like walk around when I was in early labor, like outside of my room, or have other people there other than my husband. Or the fact that like we had to be, like I had to be masked until I was in active labor. He had to be masked the whole time. Everyone else had to be masked. Other than that, I don't feel like it really affected my birth experience that much. I do think though that it probably affected my recovery more. Like there were more changes in recovery than there were in birth. So when because I have so many friends that have babies. My sister-in-law had a baby like a year before, 13 months before I did actually. So like I had been through the birth experience with a lot of different people, and I think the biggest change there was like not being able to have like our support system waiting in like the waiting room to see us, and not like being able to have someone bring us food, not being able to have someone like just hold him while we both took a nap, because we were both so tired. I think I would have loved having like my parents there or his parents, like, and I missed that like in-person moment of my parents getting to meet their grandbaby for the first time. I missed like his dad getting to hold his grandson for the first time, and his mom getting to hold her second grandbaby. Like I missed those moments, and I think those were things that I just automatically thought I would get when I found out I was pregnant, because I got pregnant like pre-pandemic by a couple months. So I definitely like was sad about those things not being the same. FaceTime's just not the same, but it definitely is better than nothing. It's a blessing to be able to use FaceTime when you don't really have another option. I think our experience recovering was also different because we were learning how to navigate everything on our own. Like I was freshly postpartum. I don't know if this is TMI, but basically when you're postpartum, they give you these giant mesh undies with basically a folded up dog pad that goes inside of them, along with like ice packs and lots of other fun stuff. So we were learning how to navigate not only like a newborn baby, but also my postpartum care. And I think I would have loved having someone who had already been through the birth experience to kind of like help us walk through that, and maybe like give us that extra confidence of like, okay, we can do this. Because instead we had like two super exhausted people trying to figure this out like all by themselves. Also, just to note, I'm sure it's always bad, but the hospital food was just so terrible. Like, I would have loved anything not hospital food after delivery. Thankfully, I made myself a sandwich that morning at home and like put it in a cooler. But like that evening, I was definitely hungry, and the food was just basically unedible. So I would say like, especially if you have health like issues issues or like dietary restrictions, the hospitals right now are not super good at working around those. I think they must be on like limited kitchen staff or just having limited things because of how everything has to be sanitized. But even the stuff that was supposed to be like safe foods for us were just like not safe. Like I think my husband ordered like dairy free and he got something that had lactate. Like it was like milk, but it was lactate. So it just like it wasn't super functional food wise for us. But thankfully we packed a ton of snacks. So definitely bring snacks, especially if you have dietary restrictions, because you don't know how much of the hospital food you're going to be able to eat. I think overall, like all of the people who came into our room were super nice, super helpful. It just kind of felt like they were like in and out. Like they wanted to be in and out as fast as they possibly could. I don't know if that was just the pandemic. I don't know if that's just normal, but it definitely felt like rushed, and I definitely struggled a little bit. Like he was having trouble latching. I couldn't get him to eat for 4 or 5 hours, and they were like basically saying if I couldn't get him to eat, then it was going to be an issue and they were going to want to supplement, which I know now is crazy because basically the first 24 hours, baby already has enough food from just like what they got while they were still in your stomach. So there would have been no reason to supplement him, but I didn't know that because I was a first time mom and I was already like freaking out that I was having trouble doing it. But yeah, so I think some of the overwhelm probably could have been avoided if we were able to have family there that could have just like encouraged us and told us that we were doing okay, because we didn't know. We didn't know if we were doing okay. We didn't know if we were completely failing. We were so tired at that point. And breastfeeding is hard. And like even when the lactation consultant came in and she was super, super sweet, I couldn't get him to latch. I think, yeah, I would have loved having a little bit more hands-on, but obviously right now they're just super restricted by the pandemic and they don't want them in their room for very long. And I know it's a huge pain every time they have to go into a room and switch out their masks and all of this stuff. So they were definitely doing like the absolute best they could. And I'm so grateful for everyone that like was so careful with us. But it definitely felt a little bit different than I was expecting. So I guess if you had to ask me, did COVID affect my birth experience? Absolutely. It definitely did. But it didn't ruin it. And I don't think it can be ruined because birth is this incredible, terrifying, just like, I don't even have all the words. Birth is really cool. I'm like, can I be a birth nerd? I just think like everything about birth is insanely awesome. And I'm just really stoked that I got to experience it, even if it didn't look like what I was expecting it to, even if it wasn't perfect. It's still this really, really amazing thing. And more than anything, we survived it, and I think a lot of the things I was stressing about just weren't even a thing. So I definitely like stressed myself out for no reason on a lot of it, which if you're giving birth in the next couple of weeks, you're probably doing the same, and I get it. But yeah, as much as there's stuff that I kind of wish would have been different, like I wish our family had been able to come see him, at the end we got to go home with a beautiful, healthy, perfect baby boy. And I would not change that for the world. I am so grateful for a healthy baby who like really is just like 4 months later doing so amazing and such a sweet little gift. That's definitely not something that I ever want to take for granted because I know not everyone gets to leave the hospital with a healthy baby. So I'm genuinely like so grateful that that was our experience. And one more thing to add, which is that because of COVID, they actually are discharging you faster. So right now they are trying to discharge you at 24 hours for an uncomplicated vaginal delivery, and I believe it's 36 to 48 hours for a C-section, as long as, and this is as long as you have no complications, no issues, baby's eating, like as long as everything's fine, all the tests come back fine. So they're letting you go earlier than they normally would, because normally it would have been like 48 hours for a vaginal delivery and like 3 days for a C-section. So we actually got to go home faster. We literally were only in the hospital for like 36 hours from like intake to literally leaving and getting in our car. So I actually loved that part. I thought that was so nice. I loved getting to go home to my own bed and to take a shower in my own house where I didn't have to wear like shower shoes. And just getting to like curl up in my own bed and eat my own food, just not gross hospital food, and have like actual coffee. That was amazing. So I loved getting to leave so quickly. Alright, so if you've gotten this far, I know it's been a minute, there's probably a pretty good chance that you might be pregnant yourself. And this might be something that you're going to be experiencing in the next couple of weeks. And obviously, like, I can only share my experience. I can only share what I went through. This was back in September, so it might be a little bit different now. I just want to say you were made for this. And you are so much stronger than you think. And a lot of the stuff that you're probably like freaking yourself out over is more in your head than it is in reality. So I would say, like, stop obsessing over the stuff that's stressing you out and just trust that like your doctors and nurses are doing absolutely everything they can to keep you safe. They want you safe. They want you healthy. They want that sweet baby of yours to be totally okay. So trust your doctors and nurses. And trust yourself, because literally this is the thing that you were made for, and that's just really awesome. Focus on your baby. Focus on the good things. Focus on the fact that this is the thing you waited the last like 9.5 months for. There's usually a silver lining to everything. I get to go home after 24 hours, so I get to go home earlier. Just getting to be back in my own space felt amazing. And then also, we got to have our family meet him at our pace, which I think has been really good. As much as it's been hard, because right now we're still really restricted with COVID, but I think I would have been really, really overwhelmed if I had had like 15 to 20 family members show up at the hospital like 3 hours after I pushed baby out, like expecting to see us and hold him, and I would have been like feeling pressured to look cute, and I did not want to look cute. Like, I looked like I got hit by a train 3 hours after I gave birth. And I had no desire to try and put makeup on or try and rally or try and get out of my hospital gown. Like, I just wanted to hold my baby. And I think that time bonding, just the three of us, really was incredible. And it showed us that we can do it, even if it was hard to be on our own. Like, we can do it. And I think that gave us, like, just that knowing going forward that we would be okay. And you guys will be too. Nothing is all good or all bad right now. It's just different. And that's okay. And I will say, like, coming from that experience, I genuinely feel like so ready and so excited for my next birth experience, because I think if I like survived that as well as I did, I'm like actually excited to do that again versus like being terrified to give birth again. So I'm really excited that that is like what I get to walk away with, is just a beautiful, healthy baby, and like I think more confidence in myself and my ability to do really big, hard things. Alright, that's all for today. Thanks so much for watching, friends. As always, please like and subscribe. It really does mean the world to me, and it means that I can like keep creating more content and answering more questions, which I surprisingly love doing. I didn't think I would love being on camera, which I still don't, but I do love the community that's starting to develop here. So thanks so much for being here. I hope you're having a really good day. Until next time.